So good morning. We're on page 186. We're in the middle of. Wait a second. No. Sorry, we're on page 188. 188, and we're discussing this pasuk that the Rebbe brought here based on the pasuk. It's a medrash, which is. Lech lecha kumi loch. He quotes the pasuk in Shir HaShirim, chapter 2, on page 186. Kumi loch rayosi yofosi ulechi loch. Rise to yourself, rayosi, my friend, my wife, my sustenance, yofosi, my beauty, ulechi loch, and go to yourself. Then he quotes the medrash on that verse, Kumi loch Bitul shel Avram Avinu. The daughter, one interpretation of Avram Avinu. And he says, and he cites Lech Lecha from Parshas Lech Lecha. And he explains that there is Rayosi Yafosi. Rayosi is my sustainer, because through Torah we sustain HaKadosh Baruch Hu, L'chu lachmu b'lachmi. He brings that verse. The Torah is called bread, and mitzvahs are called levushim, garments, which makes a person look beautiful, yafasi. But I do want to go back, because Yaakov and I had a midnight discussion last night. I had to be up for a late Zoom. And at that time, Yaakov sent me an important note. So for clarity purposes and for the record, it should be on the public notice, I want to just for a moment talk about it. On page 186, the beginning of the last chapter, look what the Rebbe says. The meaning of tshuva is not the way the world thinks that it means. The tshuva hu hirak al tvar aveira chas v'sholom. The world thinks, and just translating the words, that tshuva is just for transgression. And the Rebbe elaborates, and he says, no, tshuva is also if someone did not transgress. So Moshe, what do you need to do tshuva for? And the Rebbe brings briefly here, and the Alter Rebbe in the chapter 4 of Igeres HaTshuva says that you need to return. The word tshuva means tashuv. You need to return to your very self. Now somehow, when I was talking about it, Yaakov said that I used the word shleimus. Shleimut means perfection, completion. And then I brought an example from the concept of reincarnation. And maybe I didn't specify it well enough, so I'll do that now. I'm bringing an example from a concept in reincarnation which deals with Shleimus to the discussion at hand, which is tshuva. We're not talking here about Shleimus. I said that we see by reincarnation, bepashtus, if you ask a person, why is there a concept of reincarnation of Gilgul? The simple answer, even according to the Arizal, is to forgive, to find forgiveness for something we did wrong, so we come back a second time. What I said in the Shir yesterday was that there's another meaning to Gilgulim, which is, even if you didn't transgress, your neshama needs to come back a second time to be mashlim, to complete what it didn't get a chance to do the first time around. And I gave an example of a mitzvah of mitzvahs of the kohanim. If we're all supposed to do all 613 mitzvahs, how do mitzvahs of kohanim, etc., of malachim, of kings apply to us, etc., etc.? And the Arizal talks about that, and we spoke a little bit about it, and I don't want to go into that discussion now. The point being that there's an idea to Gilgulim that is in addition to a Gilgul being a tikkun for an Aveira, there's a second idea of Gilgul being not a tikkun for an Aveira, but a Shleimus to complete you. You did everything fine the first time round, except you didn't get a chance to do this mitzvah, that mitzvah, which didn't really apply to you, or Shiluach HaKan. Right? Just like I'm sure in Bet Shemesh, Yerushalayim, and the Borough Park, they have notices in the shuls. If you want to be Makayim, the mitzvah Shiluach HaKan, call this number, and then they'll tell you it costs $500, and you can be Makayim. So Shiluach HaKan is a mitzvah min HaTorah. But does the normal person, the average person, have a chance to do Shiluach HaKan? No. So some people somehow know where there's a nest and where there's a mother and to send it away, and you can do the mitzvah. No? And maybe our neshama came back again to do the mitzvah because the first time we didn't do it. And when we do that mitzvah, we're being mashlim. We're completing our neshama. So I use that as an example for the concept of tshuva. And what did I say? And what I believe what the Frierdiker Rebbe is saying, I'm just elaborating on his words, that teshuva as a mode for tikkun, for transgression, is the average way people interpret it. And the Rebbe says that's not the real meaning of tshuva. That's part of tshuva, but it's not all of tshuva, or better said, it's not the real tshuva. What's the real tshuva? The real tshuva is returning your neshama to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And I said that that's not the way it's understood and talked about in the yeshiva world. That's all I said. That's all I said. I didn't, and maybe the word Shleimus came in, but if it did, it was a slip, because that wasn't what I meant over there. Because Yaakov brought from the Ramchal, and by the way, I am aware of the Ramchal, because I spoke to my Rebbe, my Mashpia, once about it, and I, in fact, cited it in a book, because it was very unique. Rabbi Yoel Kahn may have a refuah shleima. I asked him once what he thought about the writings of Ramchal, because he's a teacher and genius of Chabad, of Chassidus, and he didn't teach us about Ramchal. That wasn't part of the teaching, whatever. But the Ramchal is the Ramchal. How can you not, Moshe Chaim Lutzato? So I once asked him, and you know what he told me, Yaakov? He told me that what he didn't really learn Ramchal. He said, when he says he didn't really learn it, you have to understand what that means. It doesn't mean he didn't look at Ramchal and probably looked at the whole thing and remembered the whole thing word for word almost, because he's a genius. That's not what he meant. He meant that he didn't give the iyun, the depth that he gave to studying Chassidus to Ramchal. That's what he meant, I believe. Anyway, so I said to him, so what do you say? He says, Ramchal mentions Shleimus, and it's about Shleimus. So when he told me this years ago, so I am very aware, and I believe that my Rebbe Rabbi Yoel said that he knows what he's talking about, probably better than anyone else who learned Ramchal. But anyway, don't quote me. Maybe there's someone else better than him, okay? But the idea of Shleimus, I'm very aware of. But that's not what I was talking about. So Yaakov, I didn't get a chance to dialogue because I had to continue. I had to go to sleep so I can get up in the morning for the shir. The idea of tshuva as meaning toshuf, hey, returning your neshama to its essence, is not because of Shleimus. Now you see. Now I'm going a step further. I'm not arguing. I'm sharing with you that Chabad Chassidus teaches us the idea of Toshuf Hey is not mitzat Shleimus. You know why? Now listen to this. Because Shleimus, perfection and completion, is still associated with I. Or in Hasidic terminology, with Yesh. Now you're probably asking yourself, wait a minute. The Ramchal speaks about Shleimus. Shleimus. How can I say that it's still I? Again here, when you learn these ideas, whether it's Ramchal or Chassidus Chabad or this area of Torah, there's a rule. I should have maybe said it. I said it to the guys years ago, but it's worth repeating because I don't believe you heard it, Yaakov. The rule is everything is relative. Einstein's theory of relativity is a very integral part of Chabad Chassidus. In Hebrew, we call it's an inyan yachasi. It's relative. In other words, we can discuss an issue and it has one meaning in one context, and when we discuss it in another area, it has a totally different meaning. It's relative. It's yachasi. It depends in which context it's being discussed. And therefore, I say the same thing. When we talk about the neshama returning to its essence versus the concept of Shleimus, and I share with you that Shleimus is still associated with the I, it's in the context of a comparison to Toshuv Hey, as the Alter Rebbe talks about it in chapter 40, Geras HaTshuva. If you take the Ramchal on its own, Shleimus is the ultimate connection. But if you put the Ramchal's level, in other words, the Ramchal, this is the way Chabad understands it. Others might understand it differently. The way Chabad understands it is the following way. The Ramchal was not a teacher of Chassidus. The Ramchal was not a student of the Baal Shem Tov. Nor did he have to be. But nevertheless, Toras HaBaal Shem Tov is a different dagush, a different emphasis. What's Toras HaBaal Shem Tov? Toras HaBaal Shem Tov is Bitul b'Metziut. Total obliteration of any kind of existence and entity and concept, including Shleimus. Because Shleimus already means that I am important and that I need to exist. And the I is a central figure of Shleimus. Toras HaBaal Shem Tov says there's something even deeper, where the I is totally obliterated in any way, shape, or form. And all you are is God's chariot. So if God decides that the chariot should move, it moves. So Shleimus, according to the way Chassidus sees Shleimus, is not the ultimate. It's gewaldik. It's what we call in Chabad Chassidus Yonis, and you heard the term Giluyim. Giluyim means manifestation, interpretation, and very important, but not essence. Now, if you ask a student of Ramchal, they'll tell you probably, I disagree. And they'll say, I disagree, but the truth is, did they study Toras HaBaal Shem Tov to be able to compare both of the ideas? And both are Toras Emes. It depends, what are we talking about? Are we talking about the Shleimus Sheba Adam? Or we're talking about the Bitul Sheba Adam? So in Chabad, the emphasis is on the Bitul Sheba Adam. In Ramchal, the emphasis is on the Shleimus Adam. I just wanted to get that off my plate and have it recorded, because it's a very important point. In my book on Rabbi Hutner and the Rebbe, which I'd love to give you sometime, Yaakov, I speak about 4 different ideologies. One is Slabodka, which was, covered HaAdam, or better, they use the word gadlus HaAdam, greatness of man. One is Navardik, which was Katnus HaAdam, Katan, right? Minimizing man. And then I speak about Ramchal, which is Shleimus HaAdam, and finally Chabad Chassidus, which is Bitul HaAdam. I don't spend 20 pages on it, but I do go through that. All are Toras Emes, all are Shittas, but they're different Shittas. And therefore, when you saw the Slabodka Bocharim in Europe, and it would be this way today, I don't know how it's in Eretz Yisrael and Slabodka, but in the way it was, they were all clean-shaven, with ties, pressed shirts, pressed suits, clean, polished shoes, and those that wore hats, spotless hats. You take a look at Hasidic Bocharim from Belz, Boviv, to Chabad, all kinds of Hasidic, overall, they're not as clean, okay? That's because that was not the emphasis. It's two different mahalchim. You take a look at Navardik, they were into some practices that we would look at as very strange and funny, like going into a grocery store and asking, do you have a pound of nails to sell? That's the famous the joke that they say, meaning they look to humiliate themselves, to humble themselves that they're nothing. Right? Katnus HaAdam. So, and then Shleimus and Bitul, as we discussed, it's 4 different mahalchim. I mentioned this once to a knowledgeable Chabad shliach, and who really is smart and knowledgeable, and he said, I never heard it put that way. He said, you should write a whole paper on this, because this is a very important, the 4 different aspects. I don't feel I'm still ready to do that, because you really have to be a student of Ramchal to understand better Ramchal, which I am not yet there. But as a Nakuda, I think this is a generalization. A generalization. Yaakov, do you want to say something on this?
Well, I know that the question I did have in mind is still speaking on a different level than what you're speaking on, but I'm going to try it out anyway.
Go ahead.
If you.
But Bekitzer, because I want to get into the shir. Go ahead.
If the idea is Toshuv Hey, returning us to Hashem, I'm thinking that as we know, there are different Einshim for Averis.
Right.
The worst is Karas.
Yeah.
So the only way to Mechaper Karas is Misa.
Okay.
You have no chance to be. That's the only way you're. Whatever Averis need to be Mechaper that way, that's the way it goes. So if the Tshuva has to be so complete, then there's no. When you come back, you're only coming back as a Gilgal. You're not coming back. The Tshuva is not as you are here. It's done.
You finished the question?
Yes.
The answer is with a reference for you, because I cannot get into it. The answer is the Alter Rebbe in chapter 1 of Igeres HaTshuva already, I believe, indirectly addresses your question. So I'm giving you homework.
Very good.
Get a hold of chapter 1 in Hebrew and also in English, lessons in Tanya. Listen to a shir online, and then we'll discuss it. Okay? It's a very good question. There's not what Yaakov asked is a very powerful question, and I believe the Alter Rebbe responds to it in Igeres HaTshuva. Okay. Chevra, did you Moshe, Yonason, and Yoni? Did you follow what I think I was clear.
Yeah.
Yeah, Yonason, you want to say something? We don't hear you.
One clear. I never heard that before, about the 4 shittas. So for me it's new. But I was mainly involved in Chabad with the Bitul and the Ramchal. I learned by the Mitnagid Yeshiva for a couple of months, and they learned the Ramchal over there, and I was never into it, so that's all I can say.
All I can say is that Ramchal was a very big tzaddik, and it's worth learning his svarim if you have a chance. And anyone that poo-poos the Ramchal is very foolish, very foolish. He was an Italian, a Makubal, and a great tzaddik, and his writings are tremendous. Yes, Moshe.
I just want to say that my wife has a distant cousin, and a person who's older than you, who learned in the diaspora yeshiva.
Yeah.
Like really in the heyday.
Yeah.
And like he's really into Musar, and it's interesting. He really had worked on this. He learned the Ramchal like a lot. It was just interesting because like definitely I see the difference in the Shitas, like from an interaction with him. It's interesting.
And I think you'd all would agree that at the end of the day, what do we really sink our teeth into? What we feel comfortable with. For one person, it's Musar. For another person, it's Chassidus. For a third person, it's Gemara. So as long as you learn and you willing to hear another person's learning, there's Torah in everything, and that's it. Okay, I don't want to go into that now, but I'm just saying, So for some people, Moshe Musar, it doesn't touch them, and there are other people that thrive on Musar. And then Yaakov and I have had many discussions about that. And Kol HaKavod, and just for the record, do you know that the early Lubavitch Chassidim, 150 years ago, learned Musar? They learned Musar. It's broad, but the emphasis was Chassidus, But I'm just saying that Musar is a chelik of Torah, Ramchal is a chelik of Torah, and Baal Shem Tov is a chelik for Torah, and that's it. And everyone should nahare pashte is the lashon. Everyone should explore and come to a place where a certain mahalach talks to them and they implement it. That's it. It's not a competition here. This is not competition. It's the same thing. Moshe, you and I, we spoke once about someone in Yerushalayim. I told you a story. You followed up. Who started to identify a Litvish with a Chassidish Rebbe, and you asked me about it, and I told you that, this is touching his neshama at this point. Go figure, the fact that he learned in Litvish yeshivas all his life. So what? Now he's 75 years old, and he has he met someone that he identifies with, and the fact that he's a Chassidish Rebbe, and he immerses himself in that, so be it. And if someone does the opposite, he went from Chassidus and he went to Litvish Rabbanim or Rosh Hashivas and he went to Musar, and then it happened. Anyone that tells you it didn't happen, it doesn't happen so much today, but it happened in Europe. Are you kidding? Rabbi Ruderman of Baltimore, he comes from a real Lubavitcher home. A real Lubavitcher home. And until 11 or 15, he was a Lubavitcher boy. I wrote about it in my book, I don't know if Ner Yisrael is going to like what I wrote, but that's the facts. And I show. Rabbi Ruderman remembered the Maamar that the Rebbe Rashab said in 1911 on Rosh Hashanah. He remembered the opening verse of the Maamar. He says, I was there in Lubavitch with his father. Okay? And he carried around a Tanya. Rabbi Ruderman carried a Tanya in his pocket, a little Tanya. And when they asked him about it, so he would say, Rabbi Ruderman, a Tanya in your pocket? He would say, yeah, it has large letters. Not, you understand, that was just to get them off his back. He carried a Tanya because he believed that the Alter Rebbe was a big tzaddik and this can help him spiritually. But he became a Litvisher, there's no question about it. He changed his nusach, right? And he wasn't pushing Chassidus, to say the least. Those that know about Ner Yisrael, right? But it's... So he went from being a Lubavitcher boy, growing up in a Lubavitcher home with parents and grandparents who followed Chabad, right? To becoming a Litvish. He's not the only one. I'm just pointing out to someone that everyone knows about, So it's what talks to you. And then they argue, well, he went to Slobodka, and in Slobodka, the Alter of Slobodka, basically told everyone to drop all that Hasidic stuff and just stay to the Gemara and Musar, which I'm not sure is true. I don't think it is true. Definitely not. You see? So, I wasn't there. And I don't believe that. For whatever reason, Rabbi Gifter, I wrote about him and tells, right? Rabbi Gifter spoke publicly. He said, the Chabura of Lubavitcher Bacharim that we had in Telz in 1937-38, when he came from America to Telz to learn, he says they were phenomenal. He says, we were blown away by the Yirah Shamayim of these Bacharim. Okay? So, but he didn't become a chassid, and he had issues definitely with Chabad and the Rebbe, some issues, but one has nothing to do with the other, and we don't think this way. Everyone is, it's like tunnel vision, tunnel thinking. It has, if he disagrees with here, that means he disagrees with everything. That's wrong. Okay, that was a Fabrengen. We got to get to the text. So let's go back now to 188. The last thing that the Rebbe said, the last two things the Rebbe said was that in order to experience lech lecha, or kumi lach, rise to yourself, to get to your essence, Yoni, the Rebbe says you have to recognize the problem. And I cited at the end of the shir the Hayom Yom from, I think, last Friday, or Thursday, Wednesday, one of those days. The Rebbe says there that if you don't recognize the machla, you won't have a refuah. If you don't know what the illness is, the refuah doesn't necessarily apply. When we learn Chassidus, surely when we learn Musar, it identifies the problem. Not to rub it in, but to be cognizant and aware of what the issue in particular you have to deal with. Here in this Maamar, where he speaks about getting to your essence, to overcome, he says, what do I have to overcome? This is on page 187, towards the bottom. So he says there are three things. One is the natural tendency of our body, of ourselves, to gravitate towards material, corporeal matter, tivus, lusts, and all of that. That's like a basic 101. Then he goes on to 188, and he says the second thing is, this is now on the fourth line, v'habeis. Let's learn from that. The fourth line, the fourth word on 188. V'habeis hu inyan regilus. The second issue that we need to overcome is habits. Regilut. HaAdam kosher beregilut shonot. A man is bound to certain habits. Hine lefad ze sheyeshnam regilus ki elu shehem be'etzem inyonim heim lo tov v'lupomim gamra. There are some habits that by nature they're no good and even bad. K'moy beregilus hasheker, lying. Some people have a habit of lying. Hagaiva, bragging. Vatiferes, boasting. Urechilus, and gossiping. Says the Rebbe, all of these four, shehem ra, they're not just no good. You understand? They're ra, they're bad. The very aspect of a habit is also problematic. In other words, you have to move away, Avi, from habits. And here too, I point out to you the way Chassidus understands this idea. Even if you have a good habit, if it's a habit, it's not the best. You have to transcend habit. It has to be like it's not a habit and I do it anyway. In other words, I don't do it because it's habitual. I get up in the morning and I put on my and I get myself dressed and I go into shul and I can say Ashrei in my sleep. Ashrei Yeshu V'Secha Oija Luchasela. That's no good. But I'm saying Ashrei. Of course you're saying Ashrei. But it's habitual. It's not Ashrei, you are fortunate. Yoshvei, those that sit. Beisecha, in your house. Who's sitting? In which house am I in? Moshe now is in a house in Chicago. Usually he's in a house in Bet Shemesh. What's the difference? Why am I here? Where am I going? That's a different ashrei. That's not habitual ashrei. That's transcendent ashrei. So that's what the Rebbe means here, that even the habit itself, even if it isn't bad, like gossiping and bragging and all of that, you need to transcend and go beyond habit. Ubefrat hayiskashrus bezem. And more specifically, if you're bound to, he says in Yiddish, die Zegebundigkeit. Zugebunde means tied, bound. That prevents you from understanding properly the issue and serving Hashem more specifically. People get tied to a habit. And you know what they say? And what do we say? I can't untie myself. So the Rebbe says, if you, and again, even if it's a good habit, but it's one that you've become so connected to, you need to unwind and untie yourself from that habit. Point number 3 that we need to forsake to reach the place within ourselves that's our essence. The third is understanding oneself. Dem führen sich noch dem eigenen Verstand. Conducting oneself according to one's understanding, whether it be regarding the study of Torah, Vikiyah mitzvahs, and the fulfillment of mitzvahs, and his conduct in these matters, if it's based on his understanding. He excuses himself, I cannot learn every day. I have to run to work. I got to take my kids to the bus. I got to make the train to Tel Aviv. He has his justifications, his rationalizations, why his work is more important than his learning of mitzvahs. When it comes to doing mitzvahs, he's lenient to himself. He understands that he can be lenient. Wait, stop. So this is point number 3. Point number 3 is using your mind to justify your behavior and excuses. Always coming up with excuses why you are justified in delaying learning and mitzvahs and on and on. 4. This is part of 3, but there are such people, even things that they don't understand and don't know. And the Rebbe says, the truth is, you don't know anything about a subject if you haven't studied it. It goes back, Yaakov, to what we said before, Ramchal and different things. So when you point it out to me, I take your constructive criticism. If I'm not an expert in Ramchal, be careful what you say about Ramchal. If you're not an expert in Gemara, be careful what you say. Doesn't mean, be respectful of someone who is and listen. So the Rebbe says, so too here. If you haven't studied a subject matter, Yaini, and the Rebbe says you need to study a subject matter to be considered a maven, like Moshe. He studied the halachas of Safrus, and therefore he's an opinion sayer on that. Is he the ultimate? Ask him. But the point is, you have to study the subject. You haven't studied. If you don't study, you don't know. Mikol Mokim, nevertheless, Hinehem lefi tivam nidma lehem. These people, based on their nature, it appears to them, Shem yoidim u'misnagdim raklifin wasn't. I know it already, and I'm conducting. I know it. I know it. I know it. I know what to do. Don't tell me. Says the Rebbe, Gimel in Yonim Heim. These 3 attitudes, following your nefesh abamas, your taivas, following your habits, I'm following your justification. They are a blockage for serving Hashem properly. So he's identified now the issue. And the issue we all have in a certain way. Now that we know what the issue is, we'll be able in the next chapter to creep out of the issue. That's what he's done to the last half of this paragraph. Any questions, Chavre?
Rabbi?
Yes.
I didn't catch the translation on about 4 lines up. It starts with Vahem Yamim, Ahem Heim Nechutzim Milimud. What's Nechutzim Milimud?
That to this person, his excuses are more important, Nechutzim, are more important than study, than learning Torah. He justifies so his excuses are Nechutzim, more important.
Thank you.
Okay, everyone? Yes.
When you're talking about not davening, when a person davens or meditates or does something, so you have to do it every day. You have to do it with a minion. But on the other hand, you have to try to get out of that as well.
You have to get out of what? Out of davening with a minion?
No. Out of the habit.
And now you're touching upon, now you're creeping under the surface, which is good.
No.
So,
how do you do it?
How do you do it? You start with the minyan, and you come before. I had a Rosh Hashiva, Rabbi Ushpal. He used to come 9 o'clock to the shul and start davening at his own pace. So by the time the minyan hit Shmon Esrei, he was with them, because he was the Rav of the shul. That's how you do it.
No, but even that becomes habit.
Even that's become what? Habit? Okay. Then what you should do is come 8:30. In other words, somehow break your nature. What, you know what I'm saying? And Yonason, if you're doing that and you feel you need the hisbonenus, the meditation and the reflection, and you don't end up davening, the Rebbe would always bring the Reb Chaim Brisker about what the mitzvah of tefillah is, which is davening to Hashem, even without a minyan, according to Reb Chaim. Although he doesn't paskin la'alocha, it's a whole question, but he definitely says that. So
you know who you're standing before.
Exactly, Reb Chaim says that. So according to Reb Chaim's understanding of the Rambam, what the mitzvah of tefillah is, that's tefillah. Again, I'm not saying that the Reb Chaim would paskin that lahalocha. That's a whole other discussion and analysis. But that he says that, and it's open for discussion. What the Rebbe cites Reb Chaim, and Reb Chaim wasn't a chassid, right? What is he citing? That to show you that if you need for your davening this cure, the Rebbe seems to imply that's acceptable. And that's breaking a habit. I've gotten, when I was, when I was younger, I would daven, at my own pace and quite long and all that. As I got older, for whatever reason, I tried making the minyan. And it's a struggle. This morning, the Baal Tefillah is flying. And I'm trying to say the words. And yet I want to say the Shemay Nesher with the Baal Tefillah, So for me, it's like breaking the habit that I'm into now, which is davening the Shemay Nesher with the Baal Tefillah. So what do? Do you compromise on the clarity of saying the words and thinking of their meaning versus standing Shemay Nesher? So everyone has their way of creeping out of habits. The main thing is to be cognizant of it. So the fact, innocent, that you're even asking, that itself shows that you're on the path of breaking a habit. I'm not saying that to make you feel good. I'm just saying be'emes. That's what Torah wants. Torah wants a person should feel and be cognizant that I need to think about it and do something about it. Chevra, have another shir. Have a good day. Zay gesundheit. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.